Dr. Philomena Okyeso Yeboah is a Ghanaian educator, researcher, and a poet whose specialty in the academic space chiefly sits on the shoulders of women and gender studies in African literature. She is an associate professor in African literature and gender at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi, Ghana. Her scholarship largely examines women writing in African literature and strategies of escape for the subdued African woman. She is an educator with great enthusiasm for her work and for her students' development. Philomena is also a mother, a wife, and a local preacher at the Methodist Church. In the African cultural space, the mother is analogous to a maker and a keeper of life. She exists primarily to ensure her own survival and is expected to be the perpetual nurturer of children and men. This expectation, which places her on a pedestal, creates a myriad of problems. African female writers consciously in their texts portray the African mother as a figure bedeviled by struggles ranging from domestic abuse, emotional detachment, economic hardship, and political limitations. Through a survey of African literary texts by female writers of Africa and West African feminisms, particularly Motherism, this presentation examines the various angles of escape for mothers in Africa, including pursuing profitable careers, bonding with like-minded women, drawing strength and inspiration from the arts, and boldly sharing their stories. The presentation therefore asserts that the bane of African mothers' progress is patriarchal system that hem her in and pigeonhole her role within domestic spaces. The perspective assumed here is that as patriarchal restrictions pile troubles on the African mother, she, however, strategically negotiates her spaces within the patriarchal maze and charts roadmaps that signal escape into freedom and self-actualization. You're welcome, Dr. Yeboah. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patience. And thank you very much, Penn State University, for this opportunity you've given me. I've always believed that research thrives on passion. And I'm a mother myself, an African mother, a career woman. Before I entered into marriage, I assumed that being a mother equates being responsible, being accepted by your husband, your children, and then you are expected to ensure their survival, which automatically should translate into praises, admiration, and fulfillment. And this is what really made me aspire to motherhood. Also because the mothers I saw as I was growing up seemed to mother with ease, without sharing the tensions and repression that exist within the institution of motherhood. I am now a mother of 5 children ranging between 30 and 14 years, a career woman negotiating my space within academia, whilst caring for my children and my husband, and engaging in other socio-religious activities. I must admit that my initial assumptions of motherhood has actually been displaced by realities. I have come to understand that in Africa, the mother is in an ambivalent situation. She is placed on a pedestal, whilst at the same time finds herself hemmed in from various angles, hemmed in especially by patriarchal structures. That places a myriad of expectations on her. She finds herself entrapped. She finds herself tensed in some occasions. And sometimes she finds herself burdened. Yet she's expected to surmount all of this. It is this passion, this harsh realization that informs my research. into gender studies and especially into the institution of motherhood from an angle of burden, from an angle of tension, from an angle of impositions. My passion is to work towards the realization of the mother overcoming all these tensions and contributing significantly to development. So, as an avid reader of African literature, and especially of African mother figures, I have come to understand the traps, the tensions, and the burdens of African mother that the African mother is steeped in due to the excesses in patriarchy. And I've grown to appreciate for myself how the African woman strategically usurps patriarchal powers to her own advantage. I have leaned on scholars like Kolawole, Obio Emeka. I have leaned on scholars also like Yeboah and the rest, who have all theorized on motherhood and patriarchy. Now, within the cultural milieu and the cultural and social milieu where patriarchy is practiced, you realize that men generally manipulate cultural stipulations to their advantage, and in most cases, thrive on that to subjugate women. And since my focus here is on mothers, I would particularly want to look at the African mother within patriarchal structures and how to negotiate a space within these patriarchal structures and thrive. I must say here that my focus is not a blanket condemnation of the African man. There are African men who help women, who gel with women, who see women as collaborators of development. They are not part of my focus now. My focus is on those African men who use patriarchy to dominate women and impede their progress to growth. Mercy Amba Odoyeye, in her book entitled Daughters of Anoa, African Women and Patriarchy, analyzes the lives of African women from the African culture, religion, and the linguistic space. I would want to talk about this book a little because of the Anoa figure there. Anoa is a mythical figure. It's a mythical African woman who, according to the myth, originates from the north of Africa. She was forced into marriage at a very young age, and she resisted that force, and so set off with her priestess Eku, and a dog to migrate to the south of Africa. On their way, they were very thirsty. They chanced upon a pool of water, and Eku, the priestess, asked her dog to drink the water, fearing that if it is not good for drinking, at least the dog's life would substitute for the life of human beings. But the dog drank the water and nothing happened to it. And then they all drank the water and continued on their journey. Now, Anoa has become a mythical figure and an archetype for African women who dare to resist patriarchal excesses, forced marriages, and unfair stipulations that militate against the woman's desire to progress in life. Mercy Ambondoyoye herself quotes, and says, and I quote, that no woman is voiceless. There is no such thing as voicelessness. There are only people who do not hear. And so we realize here that ultimately Odoye is calling on the African to interrogate how culture and religion subjugates women and advocates for a positive reconstruction of the woman. Now, my work is premised on her stance that the African woman interrogates patriarchy within the cultural and social sphere. Now, I also want to say here that the African one, proud to colonialism and neocolonialism, was a force to reckon with. Our ancestors held power, were respected, and their voice was heard, especially when it comes to major decisions. It was colonialism and neocolonialism that shifted the focus to the man. We can mention, yes, our own Ghanaian Queen Mother of Joso, who fought alongside men, led men in the fight against European imperialism, British imperialism. And we can, Santua is the figure I'm talking here about here. And we can talk of Amina Uzalzal. These are women figures who challenged the status quo and were not silent. African women living abroad also share in this view that proud to colonialism and even neocolonialism that we have here, the African woman was a force to reckon with. So the African mother's experience of patriarchy, colonialism and neocolonialism, and modernization has set her apart. And she needs to reclaim her voice, reclaim her agency, and carve out an identity for herself that will make her be counted. Hence, there is the need for contextual specificity, as Obiora 1997 states, in dealing with how African women navigate patriarchal structures. And so I give an overview of strands of African feminism by Nigerian women. I must say here that Nigerian women scholars have always been in the forefront when it comes to theorizing on particular isms that will fit the African woman. Knowing very well that feminism is a blanket term, but we need specificities that will fit the African soil. And so I am looking at womanism, Tiwanism, Madarism, snail sense feminism, and Negro feminism. But my work is anchored on Madarism. We have Molora Leslie Ogundipe, who in her work entitled Recreating Ourselves, African Woman and Critical Transformation, strongly focuses on the structures that oppress women and the way women react to these structures. Tiwanism is an acronym which translates as social transformation, including women in Africa, Tiwanism. And she argues that the struggles of the African woman is due to colonialism and neocolonialism, as I've already indicated, that often prioritizes the man and places him at the apex of the social hierarchy. She calls for sisterhood. She calls for bonding to interrogate those systems, those structures that impede the progress of women. And then we have Chikenwe Okonje Ogunyemi's African Womanism, in her work entitled The Dynamics of the Contemporary Black Female Novel in English, published in 1985. She looks at African women in their fight for liberation. And she talks about women alongside educated women for that matter, looking into the subjugated role of the African roles that the African woman has been conditioned to play and rising above it. And so that is Yemi. She argues that the woman writer should acknowledge powerlessness of the woman in the patriarchal culture and empower her male counterparts. She believes that womanist writers' books should end in integrative images of male and female worlds. All these women, we realize that they are working towards calling the shame on patriarchy and calling on women to integrate patriarchal structures and carve out identities for themselves. I now come to my favorites, Mary Modupe Kolawole, her work entitled Womanism and African Consciousness, published in 1997. I met her at an international conference, I think around 2012 or so. And she introduced me to her theory. She asserts that womanism is the totality of feminine self-expression, self-retrieval, and self-assertion in positive cultural ways. And so this caused the African woman to look within the cultural spaces. There are so many cultural spaces, depending on the African country you are in, to look into those cultural spaces and identify those aspects of the culture that she can source her strength from. In her work, she is careful to note that the African woman does not seek to build a wall around her gender where she would throw ideological missiles. To her, the African woman can collaborate with positive-minded men who are ready to help her carve identities for herself. I then look at Madarism, which is the theoretical lens that I am leaning on, by Catherine Acholonu, another Nigerian theorist. And in Madarism, in her work entitled Madarism, the Afrocentric Alternative to Feminism, published in 1995, she argues that a Madarist is the man or woman committed to the survival and maintenance of Mother Earth, and someone who embraces the human struggle. It is important for me to state here that Acholonu's kind of Madarism also echoes ecofeminism, since it connects the African woman with Mother Earth. Just like Mother Earth produces of its food for us to consume and keeps us all within its space, Madarism also looks at reproduction, nurturing, and sustenance of human beings. It endorses love, tolerance, collaboration, and here she even opens up to men who are ready again to collaborate with women in giving life, keeping life, and sustaining life. Adimora Eziebo's real sense feminism is seen in her work entitled Building on an Indigenous Model's Nilsen's Feminism. In this work, she encourages women to look slowly like the movement of the snail in their dealing with men in a harsh patriarchal order. I am aware that Adimora Eziebo's nasal feminism has come under a lot of attack, in the sense that some feminists and even womanists think that it is a slow way of achieving emancipation. But patriarchy can throw missiles. Patriarchal excesses can throw missiles. And so she emphasized on tact. And I just want to quote her when she sees this negotiation as analogous to the movement of the snail. Um, and I'm quoting, she says that the snail moves smoothly and efficiently with a well-lubricated tongue, which is not damaged or destroyed by these harsh objects. Sometimes the snail will traverse a sharp object, but it moves with tact. And so it's not destroyed by these harsh objects. Moreover, the snail carries its house on its back without feeling the strain. It goes wherever it wishes in this manner and arrives at its destination intact. And then if danger looms, the snail withdraws into its shell and it's safe. I find this analogy very important in the sense that it helps the African woman to negotiate her space carefully, tactfully, and then runs into the shell when danger looms. And so, well, even though people have bashed this theory, I still align with it in the sense that it talks about tact in dealing with patriarchal excesses. Obioma and Namek's legal feminism also theorize on the need for negotiations. She argues that for African women to effectively deal with patriarchal dictate, there is the need for them to negotiate and compromise to gain the freedom that they so much desire. This kind of feminism, legal feminism, has also come under sharp criticism in the sense that it kinds of force women to negotiate with women. From my viewpoint, I look at it as a kind of this Zulu concept of South African Zulu concept of Ubuntu. You are because I am, or I am because you are, which calls us together in ideologic and in a dialogic manner to talk about our issues and negotiate our spaces with tact and then achieve success. Now I turn my lens to the negative portrayal of the African woman. We are very much aware that the luminaries of African literature did not give so much dignified roles to the African woman in their writings. In fact, if you look at Achebe, Things Fall Apart, Arrow of God, all of those things, the African woman, the African mother, was playing subservient roles. And she could be beaten, she could be shouted at, she could be abused, and all she has to do is to stand at the fringes and then wail. If we look at Sepene Quincy Jagwanana, the most dignifying role she gives to this woman is prostitution. If she's succeeding through prostitution, and it is not a dignified role at all. We come to talk of other works there. So the negative portrayal of the African woman in the works of the early luminaries of African literature actually needed to be rewritten. And so when the African female writer came onto this writing scene, when she put pen to parchment and started writing about the African woman, the African mother, there was a conscious effort to actually rewrite the story of the African woman, the African mother, in their fiction. So literature became a vehicle to transport not just the grievances of the African woman, but also her strengths that make her traverse the landmines created by patriarchy. African female writers document strategies aimed at overcoming patriarchal violence, unfair judgments, and all of that. They intentionally create women characters who are able to negotiate their space within the patriarchal system. I will quickly like to quote Sushila Naksha, 1991, who says that the post-colonial woman writer is not only involved in making herself heard. So that is the female writer of Africa. They came onto the writing scene. I can talk about probably the late 60s. I can talk about Flora Nwapa, Buchi Emecheta in the 80s, Amatedu. I can talk about Chichi Dangarimba. And then coming on, we can also talk about Chika Onigwe. We can talk about writers also like Chimamanda. I've talked about Chimamanda. And then we can also even talk about Amadakwe and all of them. So these women writers are not only involved in making themselves heard, in changing the architecture of male-centered ideologies and languages, or in discovering new forms of language to express her experience. She also has to subvert and demythologize indigenous male writings and traditions which seek to label her. So they were rewriting the stories that the early luminaries of African literature had already inscribed, because they were not really fulfilling stories and did not really give any roadmaps for the women to traverse the patriarchal landmines they found themselves in. But before I enter into that space, female writers of Africa and how they structure their women, I would want us just to look at a poem written by Christina Rongano, which actually demonstrates the African woman who has imbibed the patriarchal structure and has given in the pathetic situation in which the African woman lies. This poem, though written by an African female writer, is a caution to women, mothers, that if you imbibe that patriarchal system without fighting it, without doing anything about it, you stand to lose. So the poem is entitled The Woman. A minute ago, I came from the well where young women drew water like myself. My body was weary and tired. For a moment, I watched the stream that rushed before me and thought how fresh the smell of flowers, how young the grass around it. And yet again, I heard the sound of duty, which ground on me, made me feel aged. As I bore the great umbrella, big mud container on my head, like a painful umbrella. Then I got home and cooked your meal, for you had been out drinking the pleasures of the flesh, while I toiled in the fields under the angry vigilance of the sun, a labor shared only by the bearings of my womb. I washed the dishes, yours, and swept the room we shared, before I set forth to prepare your bedding in the finest corner of the hut, which was bathed by the sweet smell of dung I had this morning applied on the floors. Then you came in your drunken lust and you made your demands. When I explained how I was tired and how I feared for the child yours I carried, you beat me and had your way. At that moment, you left me unhappy and bitter, and I hated you. Yet tomorrow, I shall again wake up to you, milk the cow, plow the land, and cook your food. You shall again be my Lord, for isn't it right that the woman should obey, love, serve, and honor her man, for are you not the fruit of the land? This poem is a caution against those women who imbibe patriarchal rule. If you look at the poem carefully, realize that the woman is imbued with strength. She does all these things, plow the field, milk the cow, cook, clean. She does all these things, carry the big mud umbrella, yet she refused to admit that she has strength to fight the patriarchal order, and she rather acquiesces and becomes a pathetic figure. Now, I have moved to observing the texts. I've already indicated that I'm looking at So Long a Letter by Mariam Maba, Faceless by Amada Akon, Possessing the Secret of Joy by Chika Inigwe, and Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Adichie. Fiction mirrors reality. and it is one of the best ways to represent the lives of women. So Long a Letter is an epistolary novel written by a Senegalese woman, Yeboah. In this novel, we have two women, Aissetou and Ramatoulaye. Aissetou is a very well-educated woman, a Liberian whose husband, a medical doctor, left her for a younger woman. She had children with him, but the husband left her. And then she decided that she would not sit down and just become a second wife, because the husband wanted her to be a first wife. She would not sit down and have a rival story. So she left with her children to the United States of America and etched out a living there. Her friend Ramatoulaye also suffered the same plight. We are talking about an Islamic society that permits polygamy. And so Ramatoulaye had 12 children with her husband, a marriage that had traversed 25 years. The husband left her for a younger woman, and Ramatoulaye did not leave her husband's house. She stays on. However, she identifies ways of overcoming patriarchal abuse. She started going to the cinema. She started visiting the libraries, and she found new joy there. Importantly, Ramatoulaye gels with her friend Aissetou, who she sees as her pillar. And so they exchange letters that defies distance, because one is in Senegal, one is in America. They exchange letters, and Aissetou even buys Ramatoulaye a car to facilitate movement. This is one of the ways to traverse patriarchal minds, gelling, bonding with women, as Ogundipe Leslie in her theory, Stiwanism advocates. And then we have Amada Aku's Faceless, where we have women, mothers, who try to negotiate their spaces in their own way within patriarchal structures. There is a pathetic mother and a mother who robustly fights the system. Matru is a mother who gives birth to children only to leave them to struggle in the open jaws of the street. So she just perpetuates streetism. Her only aim is to satisfy the desires of sex. I mean, she's so tailored to enjoy sex in such a way that any irresponsible man who comes away, she accepts and makes children with them, but can't care for the children. And so her children are found on the street. It is within this pathetic situation that Cabria, an educated woman working with an NGO, finds one of Matru's children called Fofo, and tries to rehabilitate her to make something out of her life. Importantly, we should admit that Cabria herself had issues on her own. Her husband was not that accommodating, not appreciative of her efforts, yet Cabria forges on and moves on even beyond her children to help other children who need help, like Fofo. She negotiates her way even to get the required car paint for her own car. Her husband had given her an old car he uses and bought a new car. The old car had gone to the mechanic several times, and Cabria needed paint to paint the car. The husband gave the car to Cabria, not out of love, but so Cabria can take the children to school, drive the children to school in that car. And when her request for the required paint to paint the car is ignored by the husband, Cabria one day drives this, she calls it a tattooed car, because the car comes in various colors, because it has been to the mechanic and it has been welded several times. She drives the car to Adadi's work, parks the car right beside Adade's car at Adade's workplace, gets into Adade's office with her gay highs and hello for everybody, and comes out. And Adade's workmates try to see her off. And when they get to the car park, they see Cabra entering this dilapidated car, if I have to put it that way. And Adadi, the book says Adadi felt like the earth should open for him to enter because he felt so ashamed. And when he was coming home that evening, he brought the required car paint for the car. I see this angle of fighting patriarchy as negotiating a space, in that she stopped arguing with the husband for a new car paint and dramatized it, and it worked for her. So there is a quotation there, but for time, I want to move on to Chika Inigwe, Possessing the Secret of Joy. It's a short story. In this story, a mother who had suffered from abuse by her late husband's relatives. When the husband died, they sacked her from her house because she had not given birth to a male child. The male principle is very important to that in that space. And because she only has a female child, they sacked her from the house and only gave her an old leather bag of the late husband that only had tattered papers in it. And so this woman vowed that she will ensure that her daughter does not get into a marriage where she cannot make money for herself, and so she'll be very pathetic. She becomes the architect of the daughter's future, forces her daughter to marry a man way beyond her age. Uju was 17 years, and the man she married, Chief Okeke, was about 59 years old. Even though initially Uju didn't want to have anything to do with this man, the mother forced her to marry this man. The mother ensured that the man does her bidding, provides everything for her luxurious lifestyle, and the mother backs in this luxury. Uju becomes pregnant and gives birth to a child who looks exactly like his ugly old father. Ironically, when she holds the baby in her hands, Uju started experiencing the joys of motherhood that her mother had promised her. And she says when the midwife asked her before the baby was taken to be cleaned, she was asked, what name would you want to give to this child? And Uju says, so I want to quote for us to get the story well. So she handed over the baby to the midwife to be cleaned, and she thought, this is Uju. So the antecedent of the pronoun she there is Uju. She thought, this is mine. He's all mine, all mine. I, Uju, I possess the secret of joy. She almost laughed out loud. Her legs twitched and itched to fly. When the doctor asked if she had any names for him, that's the baby, she said the name that came to her, Ifunaya. Ifunaya means love. Love, as she waited, counting the seconds until he was given back to her. She repeated this name, her voice soft and reverential, Ifunaya, and it was as if she was saying a prayer. Now, I know that listeners out there will ask or will critique me for bringing up this story, because a 17-year-old girl has been forced to marry a 59-year-old man she didn't like just because of money. I want us to actually look at it from this angle. In a bid to lash back at patriarchy, because it's the same patriarchal culture that robbed her of everything she had worked for with her husband upon the death of her late husband. So in her bid to lash back at the patriarchal culture, she actually used a man, patriarchy, to get what she likes. So the man thinks that, Chief Okeke thinks that I'm 59, I have access to any girl I want, I can marry a 17-year-old girl. Okay, come and marry my daughter, and I'll get every money that I want from you, and my daughter will enjoy. It is important for us to note here that sometimes in negotiating the patriarchal structure, the woman can be indifferent to the pain of her daughter. They got whatever they want to get. If Funaya has a baby that she likes, but she's still a young girl married to a 59-year-old man. And so even though she's able to achieve her aim, the mother is able to achieve her aim through her daughter marrying Chief Okeke. We are also trying to critique her for using her daughter to get what she wants. And so sometimes patriarchy can make of a woman can make a woman unfeeling towards the needs of her daughter in her bid to crash down patriarchy itself. And so though they get what they want, Iju is happy as a mother, but is Iju happy as a wife of Chief Okeke? That begs the question. The story doesn't go beyond that, but that begs a question that we can still think about. Chimamanda's Purple Hibiscus is the novel that I will end my discussion with. In this novel, we have Papa Eugene, who is a zealot, is an overzealous Catholic who insists on strict rules and subjugates his wife Beatrice, and his own children should use steps from Catholic instructions or Catholic doctrines. He does not apply mercy. He canes them. He sometimes stamp on them hot iron and makes them sip hot tea and all of that. And so the woman Beatrice, the mother Beatrice, felt that with this man in their midst, her own life and the life of her children are at stake. In fact, on more than 3 occasions, when there is a problem, Eugene beat his wife, who is pregnant. She had 3 miscarriages. In fact, the last one, she broke a table on her pregnancy that has advanced almost to 10, and she bled, and the life of the child slipped by. The unborn baby slipped by. Now, all this suffering created a kind of anger and bitterness in this woman, who, in the words of in the work of in the motherism, is expected to keep life, hold life, and sustain life. And so when she realizes that the man in her life will not stop at nothing, even killing his own unborn babies, she decides that the man should get out of their lives. And so she consciously, with the collaboration of her house help, Sisi, consciously laced the man's food with poison until the man dies. And she gives herself as the culprit to the police. Her own son, Jaja, gets up and says, no, I did it. I did the killing. And so she is imprisoned. This is a very important story for us. The woman is negotiating her space within a strict and painful patriarchal structure. And out of fear, out of trauma, she dares to kill the husband, who she sees as a man who is not ready to keep life, to sustain life, and to embrace his children. This book has come under a lot of critique that the woman becomes a mother and kills the man just to make way for her children to survive. We need to understand what trauma does to this woman. Trauma is a very huge area in literature, and it makes of this woman a murderer just to save her children. in traversing this patriarchal space, sometimes the woman can become anti-life. We are calling here for better ways of handling patriarchal abuse. And if you look at the Cabrera story, if you look at the story of the other women, they are more promising. But I also see here that it is a way of negotiating her space. Beatrice is negotiating her space. And out of fear, she kills this man to make way for the survival, not only of herself, but of her children. This is my conclusion. Female writers of Africa acknowledge the existence of patriarchy and its violence towards women. However, they have moved beyond the pathetic portrayals of mothers, and they have incorporated in their texts women who resist patriarchal excesses, abuse. They use various strategies to empower themselves and overcome patriarchal abuse. They lean on education, they lean on sisterhood solidarity, they lean on aspects of their culture that empower them, and some of them exploit patriarchy to their own advantage, serving as architects of their children's future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Yeboah. I now welcome Professor Makoni so that you can have engagement with Professor Philomena. Over to you, Professor Makoni.
Okay, thank you very much. I just have a couple of questions, and then I will hand over to Mercy. Help me understand how patriarchy works on a day-to-day basis. Let me paint this scenario for you. There are these young students, undergraduate students at the University of Science and Technology at Tech, for example, who are dating. They've not yet married. Does patriarchy take place during dating, or it only begins to kick in after they are married?
Yeah, Rosemary Agonita has also theorized on patriarchy, and she says that at the beginning, the male and the female, when they are young, are almost the same. There's nothing like patriarchy.
Yes.
Patriarchy only comes in when the female child grows into adulthood and marries. That is where the structures start nagging her. Especially when she becomes a mother, where within the African cultural space, the man is seen as the provider and the mother as the perpetual caregiver and nurturer of children and men. Okay, and so here the man as a provider has is mobile to go everywhere, do everything just to bring in the money and everything, would not really at times care so much about supporting the mother and all of that. And so the fact that she's seen as a perpetual nurturer of men and children does not have that space to say that today I'm going here, I'm going to do this, because she needs to consider the needs and sensibilities of her children before she does that. And sometimes that imposes a kind of problem in her ability to rise and progress.
So what it means is that when they are dating, let's say at Legon, at the University of Ghana, and they're just students, they're not married, issues about patriarchy are not part of it.
No, not at all.
Not at all. They only begin to emerge after they get married.
Yes.
Right. So if they don't get married at all, for example, you have two adults, they decide not to get married. Are there novels, for example, that talk about two people who are cohabiting and but they are not married? If they are just cohabiting, does patriarchy come in there?
Yes, if they are cohabiting, patriarchy comes in, especially when the man is the provider, is the sole provider. And you see, when they are cohabiting, sorry, the woman plays the full role as a wife.
Okay.
The only thing is that, yes, so it comes in, yes.
It
Once
comes in.
the woman gets under the mother of the man, patriarchy raises its head in most cases.
Okay, then help me understand something that is very difficult for me to fully grasp. Okay, I'm trying to work out how patriarchy works here. Let's say I have two sisters. My sisters passed away, so I can cite them as examples. I have two sisters, and they oppose how they are treated by their husbands. Okay, that is, they are not happy that they are oppressed and dominated by their husbands, right, or their husband's family. So they face issues about patriarchy. What I can't understand, though, is do they necessarily then object to my using patriarchy in my own household? Or they would say they dislike the idea of being dominated by their husbands, but they support their brother using patriarchy to dominate somebody's daughter. How does it actually work? Do you see the contradiction that I have? That I have these two sisters who feel that they don't like being dominated by their husbands. But in another world, I would then have thought they would then say they would object to me being patriarchal. But it doesn't necessarily mean, is that what happens? Or they adopt a very different attitude when it comes to their brother?
I am of the view, and I'm also saying that's based on what I see in Chimamande's novel.
Yes.
Where I'm of the view that if they don't like it in patriarchy, if they are against patriarchal rule, they will definitely also be against their brother participating.
Okay.
Because in Chimamande's book, we see Auntie Fioma, whose brother is Papa Eugene, who subjugates the wife, beats her, and all of that. And Auntie Fioma, in most cases, criticizes his brother, and even encourages her brother's wife to resist the oppressive rule of her husband.
Okay. I get you. Then my last question, because there are a lot of people who would want to ask more relevant questions about this. How does patriarchy work in contexts like this? In context of widowhood, let me put that aside. That is not important. The one part that I'm trying to find out is, are there any male authors? I don't read a lot of literature, I should. Are there any male authors that write about patriarchy and matriarchy, etc. And what do they actually say? Because the examples you gave us were very, very effective, but I thought they were largely female authors. Are there any male authors that write about patriarchy, matriarchy, etc.?
Yes, off my head, I can think of Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's work, Weep Not Child, and then Ayikoyama, the Ghanaian writer Ayikoyama. He slaps those. I use my word carefully anyway. Men who subjugate women, and brings out or elevates the women who identifies patriarchal structures and are able to overcome it. I can think of his work entitled Osiris Rising, Kemet in the House of Light. Yeah. Okay. So we have this mirror, but my focus was on the female.
I understand. So from your theorization, women don't oppress men.
Women do oppress men. Some do oppress men, just like men oppress men. I want to say, Prof. Makoni, I want to say here that when I'm talking about patriarchy and I'm talking about African men, I'm not saying that all African men are like that.
Okay. You said that at the very beginning. Yes. I buy your argument. Let me stop. Okay, thanks a lot. This is very nice. There are a lot of people who want to raise more useful questions than I am raising here. Mercy, it's up to you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for a very interesting interaction between Professor Makoni and Professor. Yeah, there are a lot of comments and questions. I think I'll start with Dorothy. You have raised your hand. If you can mute and ask your question, comment.
Hi, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. Prof. Yeboah, thank you so much for your presentation and this very important topic that is always important to have a discussion about. And Prof. Makoni, you have indicated today, so no more argument, right?
No, I've not. I've given up now. I've had my say.
Right. Anyway, there are a few comments. So my comments, basically, one is of thank you for bringing this conversation back again on the front burner here on GVF that we can all participate in. But to make a few comments, when it comes to gender socialization, it starts very early. Even when babies are born, the colors that are even assigned to them. And so we have done extensive research with gender socialization and currently working with a project where we have 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds saying that they are being prepared. These are girls being prepared to be wives. And so they do not need to aspire to certain places because they will be taken care of. These are 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and 8-year-olds in the Ghanaian community talking about these things. And so I think that it starts quite early. And that is something that we have to start demystifying. And excusing boys at home, it comes with the chores that they are supposed to do, the colors we assign to them at birth, and all other things. And of course, children are ardent imitators of their parents. And so whatever they see the men and women do at home, they also take on. And on a more sort of like deep level, I think that in some of these writings, many of the books that you talk about here, I have had the privilege to read, is that there is this whole sense of pathologizing men. I understand the thing with patriarchy, but right from the beginning, we have a conceptualization where we have already pathologized men, saying that they are patriarchal, they are controlling, they are dominating, and all of that. And so we excuse them when they do it. It's a no-brainer. When they act in the patriarchal ways, we expect them to act. And that is enshrined so much in our socialization that we tend to excuse the boys for doing it. And whenever we see one or two men stepping out to do something that is against that pathology, we hail them as perhaps the gold standard, right, that all men should follow. Perhaps our ways of socializing and pathologizing men, if we change those dynamics, perhaps what would help us to deal with it. One specific example that I can make with that comment is when a man takes care of their children, when they sort of do something that is accustomed or perhaps a sign ascribed to women, tend to celebrate, oh, the man actually cooks, the man actually parent. I mean, these are tasks that are for us in the family, right? Both men and women. And so because we have this sense of pathologizing men, we tend to celebrate these as if it's something that they are not expected to do. I'll just leave that there. And then what this segues into is that we put that burden of proof on women, right? Or perhaps overburdening women, as you mentioned from the beginning, that this whole construction of women being the nurturers, being the carers, supposed to be wife, with certain standards, when it seems to put that burden of proof on women, that in spite of all the mechanisms you're using to do well out there in the public sphere, you have to also do equally in the private sphere, forgetting that we are not able to clone ourselves. If we sacrifice for one task, the other would have to be compensated for, right? So maybe thinking about things in that way as well. And I think that this whole onslaught of colonization, of religion, and all of that seem to have created this existential competition, right, between men and women, between boys and girls, whether in our homes, in marriages, in workplaces, everywhere. There is this sense of who is the head and who is the tail, who has to take decisions and who has to follow. I think that even though I am not romanticizing where we used to be, and really African societies, if you go deep into studying pre-colonial Africa, there's always been some sense of dominance and patriarchy. So it's not about going back to a place where everything was fine and that we have to aspire to be there. Times have changed, and I think that this whole negotiation and these mechanisms of family life and society would have to change along with it. Let me stop here, else it will be like in my Gender in African class where I'm teaching for 3 hours. I can come back in with comments as well. So perhaps if I would like your thoughts about this whole gender socialization and this pathologizing of men and how we can deal with that going forward. Thank you very much, Prof. Yeboah. I appreciate your presentation.
Yes. So as you said, the right from the start, the boy child is socialized, the girl child is socialized, to take up these roles, and so the boys are spared home working in the home, and I mean all of these things. But I also have the view that if we look into the works of these female writers, they are reordering things as it's even being reflected in real societies where you see educated mothers asking their male children to do some work at home and help their sisters or whatever. It's all a way of trying to curb patriarchal rule in the house. My take on all of this is that women, if the patriarchy can never be, if it is a wall, it can never be broken down. But women themselves should look into themselves, intuition, education, empowerment, hard work, gelling with sisters to scale over the patriarchal walls and carve out identified images of themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to read one of the comments and then I'll ask Vanessa to ask a question. So there's a comment from Busi. This is a very interesting topic that is near and dear to my heart. I wonder though, as African mothers ourselves, are we not complicit in perpetuating patriarchy? How are we raising our sons? How are the African fathers behaving in front of their sons? Are they happy being a good example to their sons, showing them that women are not slaves in their own homes? Yeah, your comment on that, and then Vanessa will ask a question.
So my take on that is that, and as I've said early on, patriarchy is a wall that if you dare to break, it might crash on you. What I say is that the woman, the African mother, the African woman needs to scale over that wall. In scaling over that wall, you are indoctrinating your children to know how patriarchy plays out, the repercussions of patriarchy, because you realize that if I quickly make recourse to Chimamanda's purple hibiscus, the mother's desire to free herself and children from patriarchal abuse traumatizes her into such a fear that she turns around to kill the mother, to kill the husband, the father of her children. Which is this is murder. This is a very serious thing, very dangerous angle to traverse. So and it serves as a caution. I see Chimamanda's purple hibiscus as a kind of as a story that kind of is calculated to have a cathartic effect. You read it, you get shocked, you feel pity, you feel fear that, hey, it can happen to me. Let me check myself. Let me indoctrinate my children well. Let me be in that space where I will not have to murder, but I will have to do other things that will free myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vanessa, you have raised your hand. Can you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Okay. I've been struck by so many choices of words that each one of you have used. Dorothy's talked about existential competition, and I was wrestling with the matriarchal versus patriarchal idea. And then Busi talked about complicity. So my question is, well, we do three things. We say things, we react to things, and we respond to things. Okay? How complicit are we as mothers in all that's going on? I'm not trying to minimize how we're attacked on other sides, but aren't we complicit? Aren't we allowing some of this? Could we teach our sons? Dr. Philomena.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. So one of the problems with patriarchy is that it involuntarily makes women agents of patriarchy, so unawares. So the woman needs to look deep. For instance, there are some cultural stipulations. Let's take, for instance, female genital mutilation, where the clitoris of the woman is cut to forbid her. In some African cultures, it is practiced. In Ghana, it is banned. To forbid her from enjoying sex, this is an old time practice when men were going to war, and so the man will go to maybe a new bridegroom, a new husband will have to be conscripted to war 2 weeks after marriage, and then to keep the wife chaste, the clitoris is cut so that when he comes back, whether maimed or whatever, the woman is still for him. Now, are they going to these wars? No. Yet we have some African mothers in some African spaces who insist that as an identity marker, the girl child should go through female genital mutilation. Her clitoris should be cut so that she doesn't become promiscuous. Are we saying that those girls or women whose clitoris have not been cut are promiscuous? No. And so some of these women who who insist on certain cultural practices that militate against women with the idea that we are protecting our culture, we are ensuring that our culture moves on. It becomes agents of patriarchy. And so I really agree with you. Women are sometimes composite allies of patriarchy, and they need to be sensitized, indoctrinated, and that is where I lean on these words by female and writers to make my arguments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then we have Gabriel. You can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Philomena. It was a pleasure to be here. For your words and insightful presentation. So your words reminded me of my students, Angolan students arriving in Brazil. Because first time I saw some of them posting on WhatsApp update some of the videos of violence against women in their profiles, stories or so. I said, please stop posting that, because in Brazil you can be convicted or so accused of a crime. And then we started to talk about these differences we have between Brazil and some African countries. And then some of them stated that it was not considered that kind of sexism and of violence in Angola or so. And over time, I was put in contact with men's initiation that some of them, like very young students, declared that they had that to get in contact with what to be a man. And of course, because of their age, they denied the existence of homosexuality in pre-colonial Africa. And then everything came to my mind, reflecting on what you presented, that the way the colonial times brought. And then Boozy also is just questioning that's if perhaps we have some of the behaviors coming from before the colonial times. But I would like to address first because of first about these men's initiation that we know that many cultures have, and I would like to question if probably it initially had another meaning that was not configured to be a way to perpetuate the concept of man-centered like we have nowadays, and it became different after colonial times. So it's my first question: what you see about that, what are your insights about that? And second, you remind me also of the Black mothers in colonial Brazil. I addressed in the chat that many of the picture we have about Black women in Brazil sometimes is constructed by sexism and to the way many of these Black mothers, like mine, for example, they are said to be docile or not to very good persons, not violent. But in Brazilian history, they were leaders, what we call in African language, Yoruba, we call Yalode. Yalode are African leaders. Motherhood means that they were leaders to the houses, to the movements, to the sisterhoods, to the rebellions, to everywhere. So it's the second is something that you remind me not only specifically a question, but the first is a question: how do you see this kind of men's initiation nowadays in Africa? What are the meanings that they have that they are perpetuated by patriarchy? What do you see about that?
Please, are you talking about male initiation? I didn't get your first question right. Please, is it about male initiation?
Gabriel?
Yeah.
Male initiation.
Yeah, they said to be something like they have in different cultures, like from the beginning when they are very young, they are taught to be a man within the customs, like
Okay.
how to be a leader in the family. So what I was taught about that is about that. I don't know particularly what are the if you have any information about that, but it's what they told me.
Oh, okay. So, I think it just has to do with indoctrinating boys to be men. That kind of indoctrination is in most cases is appended by culture. It has become sometimes institutionalized. Um, um, there is nothing wrong with indoctrinating a child, be it a girl or a boy, to know the ways of the adult world and gravitate towards that. But when it militates against the interest, the progress of the female gender, that is where the problem is. And that is why in my presentation, over and over again, I was talking about mothers themselves taking up this challenge to ensure that they indoctrinate the boy child, the male well, so that the male becomes a partner in collaboration or collaborates with the woman in the developmental process in everything they do rather than become an enemy in her progress. Thank you.
Yeah, so I see Chidi and Desmond, but yeah. So before I allow you to ask questions, so I have a question from the chat. So was pre-colonial Africa not patriarchal? I get the point that there are women who were forced to reckon with and fought against colonial rule. However, it seems like these are few and far between, thus suggesting that those who became a force to reckon with were more of an exception than the rule.
Yes. Patriarchy didn't start now. And I admit that pre-colonial Africa was patriarchal. However, the rule of the father, that's patriarchy, the rule of the father, in itself is not a bad thing. When that rule is manipulated, and I see this manipulation coming up strongly after colonialism and neocolonialism, where usually the even education was opened up more to the boy child than to the girl child and all of that. So and then male governance became institutionalized and all of that. So the rule of the father existed even in pre-colonial times. However, it was not manipulated to exploit the woman and to bring her down. It was more of complementary to also what the woman can do. And so we have women who led wars. We have women who were, of course, who were even the Queen Mother, who was consulted, even now chooses the chief, who will be the chief, has a big stake in that. But when we have after colonialism, the woman's voice became submerged. It was the rule of the man exploiting the woman to advantage and leaving her within the domestic space. Thank you.
So Chidi, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much for that exciting delivery. Yeah, I was just going to ask maybe two questions, but I would love to entertain you with something I read about from some group of men who call themselves masculinists. That is a group of men who, in America, who believed that women, the feminist movement, had become so successful that it had given women advantage to, it has begun to disadvantage men. And then they then began to raise issues as to how to then rebalance the balance that has been tipped. So, and they actually began from even the Titanic. They began to then ask, when you want to talk about which gender disadvantages, which gender is really being disadvantaged in society. They began to tell their story from the Titanic, for example, where the men had to sink with the ship, and it was women and children that had to be rescued. And they mentioned even people who die in war fronts. This majority of men. You go to the prisons, those who on whom social pressure is so much that they have to then engage in crime. If you go to the prisons, for 1,000 men, you have one woman, for example. And they even talk about how nature itself disadvantages men. The X and Y chromosome. I don't know how much you know about that biology, where the Y is more brittle. The Y dies earlier than the X, so that the stress that will destroy two men, one woman can carry it and then survive it. There are other things that they mentioned, but so sometimes if we, I'm just wondering if we don't become a bit contextual in thinking about gender relationships, we tend to generalize in a way that then equates every relationship, every dynamic in relationships. We use the gender judgment to categorize it, even when the things necessarily are unfolding in ways that is just so by chance. So I'm wondering, so two questions. One, I'm wondering whether, given then how you introduced this, whether you will equate the feminist movement in Africa as part of the decolonization project, since you agree that the level of what you call patriarchy we have today did not exist on the African continent until colonization then came to introduce through Christianity and Western education and other values. So if we had better gender balance in the colonial times, do you then imagine that feminist movement to attain this balance is part of the decolonization project? So that will be my first question. The second will be, I'm just wondering whether you are conscious of the fact that most of the examples you use are actually fictions. The actual ethnographic writings, reports I have read about gender relationships in Africa do not support the view that that African societies, what people call patriarchal. All the reports that actually are based on real world data, not fiction, not poems and fictions and novels I have read actually do not support the fact that some of these things that we read in novels, they look like they are the things that people imagine and then write about. Even Chimamanda Adichie rejected when someone wanted to use the purple hibiscus. When she told the story, she was giving a lecture in the US, and somebody then came to say that they were pitying the African woman, and then imagining that all African fathers were like the father in this purple hibiscus. That Chimamanda rejected it immediately, and then so just made the point that you wouldn't use this single story to arrive at your conclusions about the African man and the family. Anyway, so much to draw from this, but thank you very much. These are just the few things I wanted to surface.
Yeah. Okay. So, your first question, if I heard you right about the feminisms, various angles of shades of feminisms arising or responding to all say so various shades of feminism coming up after decolonization or something like that. I mean, in every space, in every terrain, in every climb, there are always angles to correcting bad things. And so if colonialism was bad, and we transition to another space where we have independence and all of that, we then will agree that feminism is also came in to correct all the mistakes that had gone on insofar as the woman or mother figure is concerned. Your other question that has to do with data, quantitative data that you have, that where it actually contrasts what is in the novels, that there's nothing like patriarchy and all of that. But I want to cite the example of Ghana. I do not really I don't know which data you are talking about, but in a lot of African countries, we have radio and television shows, some hosted by men, some hosted by women, trying to address these patriarchal issues, violence perpetrated on women and their children by men. Even though I also have to say that there are cases where you have women also, men also coming in to report angles of violence perpetrated on them by men, but largely, and in Ghana here, especially I can cite Ghana, the Ghanaian situation, we have 3 major FM radio stations with female hosts. I can talk of Antenna, Oyerepa, Afutu. I can talk of Ohinini, Sompa, and I can talk of Mama Efe, also Inshra FM. These are female hosts of programs where abuse to men, largely abuse to men, run to seek redress. You know, in most cases, they come in to provide advice for them. They come in to support them with legal systems that will help them to nip the perpetrators and even deal with them. And they also come in, they also solicit material and financial help to help these women to come out of trauma, patriarchal abuse, and all of that. So I don't know your data, but in Ghana here, the reality on the ground is that patriarchy exists, and not just in Ghana, in other spaces that I also know of. I don't debunk what you are saying, but I also have a different picture. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And then we have a question from Sangita. She's saying, thank you for this talk. I'm fascinated by the term motherism, womanism, stewarnism, etc. that you presented. I wonder about two issues related to how we end up categorizing here. Number one, is there a risk that using these terms creates essentialized binaries like man-woman rather than the multiple complexities of human condition? And two, would the terms motherism and patriarchy embrace all the ways of being a mother and a man or father in the entirety of the continent of Africa? Sangita, if I haven't read well, you can just unmute yourself and clarify in case of anything. Yeah. Sangita? Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm okay. I look forward to your reflections.
Yeah, so you have a question or a comment to Professor Philomena?
Yeah, so you read that. Do you want me to explicate
Yeah, I
that?
just wanted you to clarify in case I haven't read it well. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Professor Yeboah, can you comment on that maybe? Yes.
My focus is on patriarchal structures that militate against the progress of women and how the women negotiate their space within these structures. I must admit that patriarchy also is not the only problem that the African mother, African women are confronting. There are other issues. There are other issues out there. Motherism is not the only solution. Also, to patriarchy. That is why I brought in all the other isms that also speak to areas of shaming patriarchy and overcoming it. So I admit to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's already 10:34. I think we allow one question from Desmond before we close the recorded version. Yes, Desmond, you can ask your last question. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this stimulating session. Like some might have suggested already, this is always a perennially urgent and important topic. And anytime we come to this conversation, it feels it seems to evoke a depth of reaction that might otherwise not be the case with other topics. So thank you for the work you're doing here and for bringing attention to the conversation. I think to frame my question, there are a couple of things I've been struggling with, not just in this session, but even in other contexts in which issues of patriarchy and matriarchy and so forth are discussed with reference to the African context. To paint the backdrop clearly, I have been an observer and also participant in the racialized discourse about relationship between Africans in the diaspora. So I'm talking about in the US where I live, African Americans and more recent African immigrants. A conversation that is often framed in terms of tension and sort of conflict. So if I use that same frame to think about this question of patriarchy and matriarchy and so forth, and also if I center the understanding that much of the gender dynamics we wrestle with today have to do with empire building, has to do with not just colonization as a particular political confrontation, but the larger process of deploying power for exploitative reasons. That I wonder if part of what we are looking at are surface level manifestations of a deeper challenge, a deeper, more fundamental dismemberment and disruption of what it means to be human, both for men and women and everything in between. So to put this differently, when we use the term African men or African women, I struggle to relate with those terms because going from North Africa all the way to the southern tip of the continent and everywhere else in between, there is such immense diversity, not just in what we might have considered traditional Africa, whatever that might mean, because there's nothing mummified about any tradition, any culture. But importantly, there's nothing unified in my understanding in terms of the ways imperialism has shaped particular contexts or particular agendas and so forth. So I wonder if there is, in your awareness, any existing work or an opportunity to go beyond the meta-discursive tools that we are handed for processing empire and colonization and so forth, to go to a deeper level where we then recognize that we're dealing with the same monster with multiple heads, and chasing after the individual heads in isolation might not get us far because the monster can always grow new heads and function with various other heads. Should we, or are there people who are really asking deeper questions beyond the formations of these binaries, these contextual binaries that then set men against women, or set, African Americans or blacks in diaspora against one another, or set people from one corner against the other, while empire is sort of humming along and doing what it does to exploit, to displace, to destroy with all forms of violence. So I'm hoping that my question here is really straightforward. Is there anybody doing the kind of work I'm thinking, or is there an opportunity to sink deeper to recognize that we might be dealing with a larger, more complex, more difficult issue than what we might think we're dealing with in the name of patriarchy?
Well, again, I would want to say that patriarchy, I try to trace where it is coming from. I try to trace it a little bit, and I try to connect it to colonialism, imperialism, and all of those things. I also would want to say, and the main theory I leaned on, or I anchored my discussion on motherism. It's not just about the African woman as a keeper of life and a sustainer of life and all of that. The African woman is analogous to Mother Earth, where the earth is from the earth that we live and we eat, and it sustains us and keeps us and all of that. And so these are the larger discussions insofar as patriarchy, motherism, and all of that is concerned. If even you want to trace it way back to the early writings of Africa, where you have, for instance, Tino Achibe's Things Fall Apart, where you have a man, Okonkwo, trying to embody the whole of the Imofia society and all of that, and is crushed down by the colonial power that forces him to commit suicide. Then you look at whether there are larger players working over there. So, in as much as I admit that patriarchy is working against the rise of the African woman, in most of the cases where you see patriarchal, for instance, if we even look at Chimamanda Adichie's Purple Hibiscus, the man, the Papa Eugene, punishes the wife, beats her, punishes the children, takes them through various angles of abuse because he is practicing the bigger religion, Catholicism. And so he sees that when you disobey a religious order or the doctrine or whatever stipulation, you need to be crushed, you need to be whipped, you need to be caned and all of that. In actual fact, it is an indoctrination that he doesn't even understand, but manipulated by the colonial power. And so if they manipulate a religion for you, you don't understand it, and then you just go through it and punishes your own children just to be true to that religious doctrine, without ascertaining that the very God you are worshiping is a God who also shows mercy. Then there are bigger issues that these things are also submit under. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's now 10:42, and I think I would like to welcome Professor Makoni for the final thoughts before we close the recorded session. Professor Makoni?
Okay. Thank you very much to everybody. Before we move on to the unrecorded sessions, the problem about discussing mothers is that all of us here have mothers, whether you are thinking of mothers biologically or socially. And so this is a topic that affects all of us. There's no way you could be here if there wasn't somebody called a mother. So that we are all implicated in issues about motherhood. But the part that I'm interested in, for example, is as follows. I want to focus on, let's say, the South African situation, because that shows another dimension of motherhood that is interesting. There's no white South African who was not, in a way, looked after by a Black woman acting as their mother. So I'm always interested and intrigued in situations where racism eventually occurs, how that takes place, how you end up being discriminating against the very same people, very same women that brought you up. Right. And then the second thing that I'm very much interested in is what happens to issues about patriarchy in interracial relations. How does it play itself out if my son marries a white American girl? Right? You can say, oh yeah, he got his patriarchy from his. But in other words, it's important to follow what our presenter and what Desmond was talking about, to complexify the arrangements and say, if you want to see how patriarchy works, look at how Black boys behave when they are with white girls, when they marry white girls. If patriarchy is such a powerful force that they can't change, then you would expect them to behave in a manner that is patriarchal. But if they behave differently, it means that they are able to change. But anyway, let's move on to the unmoderated session.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we are now, I'm going to stop recording. And before that, I'd like to announce the speaker for next session. So next week, we are going to have Peter Alegi from Michigan State University. And then he'll be having conversation with Makoni. So you are welcome to join same time. Yes.
Yeah, and Peter Alegi will be talking about African football.
Yes. So you are all welcome to join. That's going to be very interesting conversation. Yes.
First question, if